Number 1. Grotta Di Lamalunga. In October of 1993, a team of cavers from the Centro Altamurano Ricerche Speleologiche squeezed into a limestone fissure outside Altamura in the heel of Italy. They dropped roughly 8 meters down an entrance shaft. They crawled. And in a side chamber they now call the apse, a face was looking back at them out of the wall. It was a skull, and it was buried in white mineral popcorn. Calcite had been dripping onto him for 100,000 years or more, growing over the bone in coralloid knobs until the skeleton and the cave had become one object. Almost every bone is there. It is one of the most complete Neanderthal skeletons ever found. It is also functionally part of the rock. He almost certainly fell. The shaft opens at the surface, and once he was at the bottom of it with a broken leg or a shattered pelvis, there was no route out. He would have been able to see daylight while he died. Because the calcite holds him, nobody has excavated him. 30 years on, he is still lying exactly where he fell, studied by laser scanners, photogrammetric rigs, and cameras pushed down poles. In 2009, researchers removed one fragment of his right shoulder blade. That single piece did enormous work. Uranium-thorium dating of the calcite around him gave an age between 128,000 and 187,000 years, published by Laurie and colleagues in the Journal of Human Evolution in 2015. The same fragment yielded mitochondrial DNA that was, at the time, the oldest Neanderthal genetic material ever sequenced. Giorgio Manzi and Fabio Di Vincenzo led the analysis of the skull. It shows a large rounded brain case, a heavy unbroken brow ridge, no chin, and a cranial capacity somewhere around 1,200 to 1,300 cubic centimeters. Some features look archaic even by Neanderthal standards, which suggests a population still in transition. The cave is gated. Only accredited researchers go in, and the argument over whether to cut him out has a hard edge to it because the calcite that traps him is the same calcite that dates him. Free the body, lose the clock. Which raises a question worth carrying into the next cave. What happens when the thing on the cave floor was not an accident at all? Number 2. Grotte De Cussac. On the 30th of September, 2000, an amateur caver named Marc Deluc pushed through a blocked passage in the Dordogne and found 1.6 kilometers of untouched gallery. More than 800 engraved figures cover the walls. Bison, horses, mammoths, rhinoceros, birds, and stylized female forms. Some cut 2 centimeters deep into rock soft enough to carve with the finger. The work is Gravettian, roughly 25,000 to 30,000 years old. The floor is what makes Cossac extraordinary. It has never been walked on since the Ice Age. Footprints survive. So do the black smears where torches were wiped against the wall to bring the flame back. And lying on that floor are people, at least 6 individuals. Human burial inside a decorated deep cave is almost unknown in Western Europe, and Cossac has both in the same passages. They were not placed in dug graves. They were placed in bars, the shallow hollows that hibernating cave bears had scraped into the sediment thousands of years earlier. The bears made the beds, the living used them as tombs. There are no grave goods, but red ochre appears on and around several of the bone concentrations. One deposit holds a nearly complete adolescent. Others are partial and mixed together. Jacques Joubert of the University of Bordeaux has directed the research since the beginning, and taphonomic work by Sasha Kaki and colleagues showed something colder still. Some of the remains were moved and rearranged after the bodies had already decomposed. People came back down in the dark to handle their dead again. France closed the cave almost immediately. Researchers enter a handful of times a year in sterile suits, on marked paths, with carbon dioxide levels and microbial load monitored throughout. There is no replica and no tourist route, and there probably never will be. What nobody can say is what the arrangement meant. Offerings, honored ancestors, or people deliberately excluded from whatever the normal treatment of the dead was. The engravings do not explain the bodies, and the bodies do not explain the engravings. Cossac at least had art to justify the journey. The next cave has no art at all, and the people who went in were not our species. Number 3. Bruniquel Cave. In the Tarn-et-Garonne in southwestern France, a teenager named Bruno Kowalczewski spent years digging out a blocked entrance and opened it in 1990. 336 meters from that entrance, past every trace of daylight, the floor of the cave has been rearranged. There are 2 rings. The larger is about 6.5 meters across. There's a smaller one beside it, and 4 additional stacked piles nearby. They are built from roughly 400 pieces of stalagmite, deliberately snapped to similar lengths. Assembled end to end, the stalagmite would run 112 meters. The whole construction weighs more than 2 tons. Many of the pieces are reddened and blackened by fire. Burnt bone fragments sit among them, and 17 separate fire zones have been mapped across the structures. Radiocarbon in the 1990s could only report that the material was older than 47,000 years, which is where the method stops. Then, Sophie Verheiden of the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences ran uranium series dating on the calcite that had regrown over the broken stalagmite. The answer, published with Jacques Joubert and Dominique Gentil in Nature in May of 2016, was 176,500 years, plus or minus 2,100. At that date, there is only one candidate. Our species was not in Europe. Neanderthals built this. Consider what the job actually required. You cannot do any of it without fire. You can carry and keep alive 300 meters underground. You have to break several hundred stalagmites to comparable size, move 2 tons of stone through a cave passage, and arrange it into circles. That is coordinated labor with a plan behind it, executed by more than one person, in absolute darkness 176,000 years ago. There is no habitation debris. Nobody lived here. The interpretations run from ritual gathering place to emergency shelter to some kind of controlled fire experiment, and none of them is testable with what survives. The cave is closed now. Researchers work from a laser-scanned digital model instead. And the deeper problem stays open, because if Neanderthals were doing this before modern humans existed in Europe, the behavior is older than any story we have told about it. Sometimes, though, the story arrives before the evidence does. Number 4. Cueva De Los Tayos. In the Mojona Santiago province of southeastern Ecuador, in Shuar territory, a vertical shaft roughly 63 meters deep drops into a cave system with kilometers of passage and chambers so angular that photographs of them look built rather than dissolved. The name comes from the Tayos, the oil birds that nest inside, harvested for centuries for their fat. In 1969, a Hungarian-Argentine researcher named Juan Morich filed a formal claim with Ecuadorian authorities. He described a library underground, not books. Engraved metal plaques, statues, and artifacts of unknown origin stored in a chamber deep in the system. Eric von Däniken published the story in The Gold of the Gods in 1972, and it went around the world. Von Däniken later conceded he had never entered the chambers he had described. So in 1976, Stan Hall organized something extraordinary. A joint British-Ecuadorian expedition of more than 100 people, including soldiers from both armies, professional cavers, and scientists. Neil Armstrong served as honorary president, and the man who had walked on the moon went to Ecuador to look for a metal library, though in a 1998 interview he played down how active his part had been. They did not find one. What they brought back was archaeology and biology instead. Artifacts and human remains reaching back to roughly 3,500 years before the Common Era, along with dozens of previously unrecorded species of bat, butterfly, and beetle. The story did not die. Petronio Jaramillo claimed he had personally seen the collection as a young man and refused to disclose the route. He was murdered in 1998 in what appears to have been an ordinary robbery, and the route died with him. The squared passages have a straightforward explanation. In this limestone, dissolution follows existing fracture planes, and fractures meet at angles, so water carves along the joints and leaves walls that look quarried. What gets lost is that the real cave is not boring. The Shuar have documented ritual use and bird harvesting reaching back generations, and the oilbird colony echolocates in total darkness, one of very few birds on Earth that does. Some caves, though, are hiding something, and the water is what hides it. Number 5, Grotte Cosquer. At Cap Morgiou, near Marseille, the entrance to a painted Paleolithic cave sits 37 meters below the surface of the Mediterranean. To reach the art, you swim a submerged tunnel roughly 150 meters long, then surface into chambers that still hold air. Henri Cosquer, a professional diver, found the entrance in 1985 and worked his way to the paintings by 1991. That same year, 3 divers died trying to make the passage, and the deaths forced the discovery into public view. The entrance is now permanently gated. Inside, there are 2 phases of work: hand stencils from around 27,000 years ago, and animal figures from around 19,000. More than 60 hands survive, many with fingers that appear folded or shortened. Over 500 figures have been cataloged in total, including horses, bison, ibex, chamois, and big cats. Then there are the subjects you find nowhere else. Great auks, seals, shapes that read as jellyfish. Jean Cloutz, who led the authentication, worked with a marine bestiary that simply does not appear in inland caves. The great auks matter for a second reason. That species survived until 1844, when the last confirmed breeding pair was killed in Iceland. People painted it, and people finished it. The reason a painted cave is now underwater is the reason it was painted at all. During the last glacial maximum, sea level stood roughly 100 to 120 meters lower than today. Cosquer's entrance opened onto dry land, kilometers from the shoreline of the day. Everything the artist could see out of that mouth is now seabed. The water is still rising, and the cave is still losing. An unknown share of the lowest artwork has already been drowned, and condensation and salt attack what remains, which is why a full-scale replica, Cosquer Méditerranée, opened in Marseille in June of 2022, built from photogrammetry, accurate to a few millimeters. It is the only decorated Paleolithic cave on Earth with an underwater entrance. It is also a sea level gauge with human art painted on it. Water is one way to make a cave unreachable. Professional consensus is another. Number 6. Chiquihuite Cave. High in the Astillero Mountains of Zacatecas, Mexico, about 2,740 meters above sea level, Cyprian Ardelean of the Autonomous University of Zacatecas started digging in 2010. Over the following decade, his team pulled roughly 1,900 stone artifacts out of stratified deposits made on a green-gray limestone that occurs locally. The dates from the lowest artifact-bearing layers came back between about 26,500 and 33,000 years ago. Ardelean published in Nature in July of 2020, alongside a companion continental analysis by Lorena Becerra Valdivia and Thomas Hyam. To see why that detonated, you need the timeline it landed in. For decades, the Clovis first model put the first Americans at roughly 13,000 years ago, arriving through an ice-free corridor. Monteverde in Chile had already pushed that back to about 14,500. Chiquihuite would put people deep in Mexico before the ice sheets closed the corridor at all, roughly doubling the accepted age of human presence in the hemisphere. The response was fierce. David Meltzer, Ben Potter, and others argued that the objects are geofacts, rock broken by natural processes and mistaken for tools. They pointed to what is missing. Sediment DNA analysis found no human genetic signal in the oldest layers. There are no hearths. There are no cut-marked bones. There are no human remains. Ardelean's counter is that the flaking is repeated, directional, and deliberate, that the radiocarbon comes from charcoal and bone within the same stratigraphic units, and that the team specifically checked for rodent burrowing and slope movement that could have dragged younger material down. The dispute has become unusually personal for a scientific disagreement, playing out in journals and in the press with language that rarely survives peer review. If Chiquihuite holds, the implication is strange in its own right. A population would have to have been present for 10 millennia while leaving almost nothing else behind. Some archaeologists have suggested exactly that, a failed early dispersal that arrived, persisted thinly, and died out without descendants. One cave, in other words, has put an entire continent's chronology in dispute, and a cave can just as easily do the opposite and freeze a wrong answer in place for 50 years. Number 7. Grotta Guattari. In February of 1939, workmen digging beside a hotel at San Felice Circeo on the coast south of Rome broke into a cave that a rockfall had sealed for tens of thousands of years. Nothing had moved inside it since the collapse. Alberto Carlo Blanc reached the site within days, which by the standards of the period was excellent practice. In the rear chamber, lying alone on the floor, was a Neanderthal cranium. The specimen is catalogued Circeo 1. The base of the skull, around the opening where the spinal cord passes through, had been broken away. And Blanc recorded the skull sitting inside a deliberate ring of stones. He read it as ritual. The brain removed through the base, the head placed in a circle, the whole thing staged. That interpretation went into textbooks and stayed there, and it shaped the popular image of Neanderthals as ritual cannibals for the next 50 years. Then, the taphonomy caught up, Mary Steiner reanalyzed the animal bones from the deposit in the 1990s. Tim White and others compared the skull damage against known carnivore feeding traces. The cave was full of hyena coprolites and gnawed bone. The deposit is a hyena den. Spotted hyenas routinely open the base of a skull to reach the brain, and they routinely drag heads into dens. Under that reading, no Neanderthal staged anything. Scavengers carried a head in, chewed it, and the ring of stones is rockfall that happened to fall in a circle. We cannot fully recheck the arrangement because the 1939 excavation left few photographs. Then, in May of 2021, the Italian Culture Ministry announced 9 more Neanderthal individuals from the same cave, work led by Mario Rolfo and Francesco De Mario with the regional Soprinadenza. 8 of them date to between 50,000 and 60,000 years ago. One is older, between 90,000 and 100,000. All 9 are male, and most again carry carnivore damage. A cave with 10 Neanderthals in it, most of them eaten by hyenas, is not a gentler story than the ritual one. It is just a different horror, and this one is better supported. Not every cave floor holds the dead. Some of them hold a walk. Number 8. Bàsura Cave. Above the town of Toirano in Liguria, in northwestern Italy, sits a cave whose local name means the Cave of the Witch. Cavers pushed past a tight constriction in 1950 and found deep galleries where the floor is soft clay and the clay had been walked on. Footprints, handprints, knee impressions. Charcoal on the walls dates the visit to roughly 14,000 years ago, and Marco Romano and colleagues published the full reconstruction in the journal eLife in 2019. 5 people went in, 2 adults and 3 children of approximately 3, 6, and 11 years old. The 3-year-old is among the youngest individuals ever identified from Paleolithic footprints anywhere in the world. Now walk it with them. Torches of pine, identified from the anatomy of the charcoal left on the walls where they were wiped to revive the flame. A pine torch burns roughly 20 minutes before it needs attention, so this group carried spares and knew it would need them. Hundreds of meters in, the ceiling drops and the prints change. All 5 of them go down onto hands and knees. The knee and knuckle impressions are still there in the clay. Foot dimensions let the team estimate stature and body mass for each individual. Stride length and pressure distribution indicate unhurried, deliberate movement. Nobody was running. Nobody was being chased. In the deep chamber, there are clay figures and marks drawn with fingers. And the walls they crawled beneath are scored with long parallel gouges, because Bàsura is one of the richest cave bear sites in Europe, holding thousands of Ursus spelaeus bones and polished hollows where the animals hibernated. Those bears predate the human visit by tens of thousands of years. There's no evidence the group ever met a living one. But they were crawling through a bear cemetery in the dark with a toddler. The traces record a single episode, not an occupation. They went in once, went deep, and left. Why a 3-year-old was brought along is the part nobody can answer. Elsewhere, children were brought into caves for a reason that is documented, and far worse. Number 9. Actun, Tunichil, Muknal. In the Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve in western Belize, a river comes out of a hillside. The Maya name of the cave behind it means, roughly, the Cave of the Stone Sepulchre. Thomas Miller documented it in 1989, and Jaime Awe led the archaeology through the Western Belize Regional Cave Project. Getting in means swimming into the river mouth and wading upstream for about a kilometer in the dark. Then you climb, because the archaeological chamber sits on a raised ledge above the water. At least 14 people are up there. Infants through adults, including several children under 5 years old. Most of the remains date to the late Classic period, the 8th and 9th centuries of the Common Era. That window matches the severe multi-decade droughts recorded in the regional climate proxies with uncomfortable precision. The logic is not mysterious. For the Maya, caves were entrances to Xibalba, the underworld, and they were where rain came from. When the rain stopped, people went further into the earth and gave more. The chamber floor is covered in ceramic vessels, many deliberately broken with a kill hole punched through them, some carrying the monkey face motifs associated with ritual deposits. Slate and obsidian implements found nearby fit documented bloodletting practice, and several crania show blunt force injuries consistent with sacrificial killing. Then, 11 centuries of drip water went to work. Calcite has cemented the bones to the floor and coated them in crystal. The best-known individual, called the Crystal Maiden, is a sprawled adolescent skeleton entirely encased in sparkling mineral, glittering when a headlamp crosses it. Osteological reassessment suggests that individual was probably male, which has not slowed the nickname down at all. The cave is open to guided visitors, and that has cost it. A tourist dropped a camera and cracked his skull, and cameras were banned outright in 2012. Access now runs through licensed guides with capped numbers, making it one of the most tightly controlled archaeological sites in the Americas. Calcite is one way a cave keeps a body. Cold and dry is another, and it fooled an entire generation of scientists. Number 10. Cueva Del Milodón. Near Puerto Natales in Chilean Patagonia, there is a cave mouth about 30 meters high, running roughly 200 meters into the hillside. In 1895, a German settler named Hermann Eberhard found a large piece of hide inside it. The hide was thick and reddish with coarse hair still attached, and studded with small bony nodules called dermal ossicles, which sit inside the skin like armor plating. Those ossicles identified the animal. This was ground sloth, later assigned to Milodon darwinii, an animal that stood up to 3 meters when it reared and weighed more than a ton. Charles Darwin had collected Milodon material in Argentina decades earlier, which is how the species got its name. Rudolf Heuthel and Francisco Moreno published competing accounts, and a genuinely reasonable argument broke out because the skin did not look old. It looked like something you could have taken off an animal that season. So people concluded the obvious thing. Milodon was still alive somewhere in the interior of Patagonia, and expeditions were funded to go and find one, including a search backed by the London Daily Express. Radiocarbon eventually settled it. The hide is roughly 10,000 to 13,500 years old. The cave is cold, dry, and salty, and that combination arrests decay almost completely. Dung deposits meters thick survive on the same floor, preserving the animal's diet of grasses and shrubs, and ancient DNA, extracted from both dung and hide, has since placed Milodon close to the two-toed sloth lineage. The harder question is the one still open. Human artifacts and hearths in the cave show people were present in the same window. Reported cut marks on some bones remain disputed. Whether people hunted these animals, scavenged them, or simply shared the shelter with them, nobody can currently prove, and heavy looting of hide and dung before the site was protected destroyed the stratigraphy that might have answered it. Bruce Chatwin opened in Patagonia with a scrap of that skin, which is how a Chilean cave ended up in the opening paragraph of a travel classic. Preservation can also work the other way and record not an animal, but a decision. Number 11. Cueva De El Mirón. El Mirón is a broad cave mouth above Ramales de la Victoria in Cantabria in northern Spain. Lawrence Guy Strauss and Manuel González Morales have excavated there since 1996, working through a sequence that runs from the Masterian to the Bronze Age, more than 40,000 years of human use in a single deposit. In 2010, they found a burial behind a large fallen limestone block. The face of the block carries fine engraved lines, including nested chevron motifs. It appears to have been a marker. Behind it lay a woman, roughly 35 to 40 years old at death. Radiocarbon dated to about 18,700 calendar years ago in the lower Magdalenian. Her bones and the sediment packed around them are saturated with red ochre, and the ochre is not ordinary. It contains specular hematite, which glitters and which does not occur locally. Someone carried it in. The skeleton is incomplete. The cranium and many other elements are missing. And the bone surfaces record a sequence rather than a single event. She was buried. The grave was opened, and a carnivore reached the body and partly defleshed it. Then people came back, found what had happened, rearranged what was left, and covered her again in fresh ochre. That is not a burial. That is maintenance. Somebody was checking on her. Pollen from the grave fill hints at plant material placed with the body. Isotope analysis indicates a diet dominated by red deer and ibex. She is one of very few Magdalenian burials known from the entire Iberian Peninsula, which is why the site was published as a dedicated special issue of the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2015. The nickname is a deliberate echo of the Red Lady of Paviland, the ochre-stained burial found in Wales in 1823. That one is far older and turned out to be a young man. This one really is a woman, and the ochre on her is far heavier. She was found in 2010 and identified within a season. The last cave in this list took 20 years to give up what was inside it. Number 12. Sterkfontein. Northwest of Johannesburg, in the region called the Cradle of Humankind, the Sterkfontein caves have been producing hominin fossils since the 1930s. In 1994, Ron Clark was going through a box of blasted rubble from the site and found 4 small foot bones that had been cataloged years earlier as animal material. They were not animal. The foot combined an ape-like grasping big toe with a heel built to carry weight the way ours does. Clark nicknamed the specimen Littlefoot and cataloged it SATW573. Then came the part that sounds invented. In 1997, Clark sent 2 assistants, Stephen Motsumi and Nkwane Molefe, into the deep chamber called the Silberberg Grotto with a cast of the broken bone end, and told them to find the matching break somewhere in the cave walls. They found it in 2 days. The rest of her was still in there, locked in breccia, a natural concrete of rock and sediment. Excavating her by hand with air scribes took roughly 20 years. What emerged is more than 90% complete, the most complete Australopithecus skeleton ever recovered. She is an adult female who appears to have fallen down a shaft. Her left arm carries a healed fracture of the kind you get catching yourself on an outstretched hand, so she survived one fall and did not survive another. Her age is still being fought over. Daryl Granger dated the deposit using cosmogenic aluminium and beryllium isotopes and got 3.67 million years, which would make her older than Lucy. Other researchers working from Flowstone argue for something nearer 2.2 million, and the disagreement turns on whether that Flowstone filled voids long after the body arrived. Clark assigns her to Australopithecus prometheus, a species name many colleagues refuse to use. What is not disputed is her body. Legs longer than arms, unlike any ape, which means committed upright walking. A brain of roughly 480 cubic centimeters, about a third the size of ours. And a big toe that still moves, which means she had not given up the trees. She was cleaned, reconstructed, and unveiled publicly in 2018. 12 caves, 12 very different problems. What they share is why any of it survived at all. A cave is a machine for stopping time, and it works on physics rather than luck. Temperature underground stays close to the annual mean of the region, year-round, which removes the freeze-thaw cycling that shatters bone on the surface. Humidity stays high and stable, so tissue does not dry, crack, and flake. There is no ultraviolet light, so pigment does not fade. There is no wind, no rain, no frost heave, no plow, and almost no root action. On top of that, water saturated with dissolved limestone drips continuously and lays down calcite. That is what welded Altamura Man into his wall and turned the dead at Actun, Tunichil, Muknal into crystal. It is also what makes uranium series dating possible, because the mineral carries its own clock. Different conditions preserve different things. Cold, dry, and salty mummifies soft tissue, which is why Cueva Del Milodón still holds sloth skin. Damp clay takes impressions, which is why 5 people are still walking through Bàsura. Breccia cements bone into stone, protecting Littlefoot and imprisoning her at once. There is a cost to this, and it is easy to miss. Caves preserve so much better than open ground that they distort what we think people did. Deep cave burial looks like a widespread custom, partly because the open-air equivalents have disappeared. The record is shaped as much by chemistry as by behavior, and these 12 sites survived because of geology, not because they mattered more. The word covers at least 3 completely different situations, and it is worth separating them. Some caves are physically forbidding. Cosquer's flooded tunnel has killed divers. The Tayos shaft drops 63 meters. Actun Tunichil Muknal starts with a swim. Nobody decided these were off limits, the geology did. Some are legally closed, and the reason is conservation. Lascaux shut in 1963 after visitor traffic triggered microbial and algal damage that is still being fought. Cussac was closed within weeks of discovery specifically, so it would not become another Lascaux. Human breath adds carbon dioxide, which dissolves calcite and destabilizes paint layers. Body heat and lamp heat shift the microclimate measurably. Introduced fungi and bacteria have damaged multiple decorated caves. Sterile suits, marked paths, and capped visitor numbers are now standard, and replica caves at Lascaux, Chauvet, and Cosquer resolve the conflict by giving the public a copy. And some caves are forbidden in a third sense, which is professional. Chiquihuite's dates were unwelcome to a model that had held for decades. That is not a conspiracy, and calling it one misses what actually happens, which is that funding, publication, and excavation permits all flow toward the expected answer. There is also heritage law protecting living communities' claims at Actun Tunichil Muknal and in Shuar territory, and there is the damage publicity does. Von Deniken's book sent treasure hunters to Ecuador, and looters stripped Cueva Del Milodón before anyone protected it. Almost none of it is secrecy. Nearly all of it is damage control. Strip away the individual stories, and one pattern is left standing. People kept going where there was no reason to go. Past the twilight zone, a cave offers nothing. No food, no warmth, no better shelter than the entrance already provides. Every meter deeper costs fuel, time, and risk. And yet Neanderthals built rings 336 meters in 176,500 years ago. Gravettian people carried their dead hundreds of meters into Cussac. A group at Bàsura brought a 3-year-old into a crawl. Maya priests waited a kilometer upstream in the dark. The logistics alone imply planning. Pine torches burn about 20 minutes, so the charcoal wipe marks on cave walls are evidence of spare fuel, timing, and a return plan. The explanations on offer do not resolve into one. The dark zone may have been understood as a boundary with another world. Deep chambers resonate, and art in several caves clusters where the acoustics are strongest. Darkness and elevated carbon dioxide alter perception and can induce hallucination, so the cave may have been a tool for changing states of mind. There are practical readings, too, involving caching, refuge, and extraction of clay and flint. And there is initiation, the journey as ordeal, though a toddler's footprints sit awkwardly with that. What stands out most is that Neanderthals and modern humans both did it, separately. Whatever drives people into the deep dark is older than either species' culture. 3 of these sites are still being argued over, and the arguments are all about method. Radiocarbon measures decaying carbon-14 in organic material and runs out at roughly 50,000 years. That ceiling is why Bruniquel's early results could only say older than 47,000. Uranium series dating measures, thorium accumulating in calcite, and reaches back hundreds of thousands of years. It is what dated Bruniquel and Altamura man. Its weakness is that it dates the mineral, not the bone, so the stratigraphic relationship between the two has to be argued. Cosmogenic nuclide burial dating measures the ratio of aluminium and beryllium isotopes in quartz that has been shielded from cosmic rays. Daryl Granger used it for Littlefoot's 3.67 million year figure. Competing flowstone dates put her nearer 2.2 million, and the entire dispute is about whether that flowstone filled voids long after she arrived. Optically stimulated luminescence dates the last time sediment grains saw sunlight. Bayesian modeling combines multiple results into a probability range rather than a single number. Chiquihuite is different, again, because nobody seriously disputes its dates. The fight is over whether the objects being dated are tools at all. Contamination, reworking, and burrowing animals are the standard objections everywhere. Independent replication in separate laboratories is the standard resolution. Every site in this video has been redated at least once, and several will be redated again. Karst terrain covers roughly a fifth of the ice-free land surface of the planet, and the overwhelming majority of it has never been examined archaeologically. New decorated caves still turn up in Europe several times a decade. The tools are changing fastest. Sediment DNA can now recover human presence from cave floor dirt with no bones present at all, and both Neanderthal and Denisovan genetic material has been pulled straight out of sediment. That technique could reopen sites that were excavated and emptied a century ago, because the dirt itself is now the evidence. LIDAR and drone survey are finding entrances hidden under forest canopy. Underwater archaeology is expanding along drowned Ice Age coastlines, and the shelves off Doggerland, Sundaland, and the Mediterranean hold unexplored karst that was dry land when people were painting. The clock runs the other way too. The same sea level rise that is eating Cosquer drowned an unknowable number of sites we will never record. Warming is destabilizing preservation in cave systems that were reliably cold for millennia, and thawing permafrost caves in Siberia are shedding organic material faster than anyone can collect it. So, the restraint holds where it can. Altamura Man will probably stay in his wall for another generation. Cussac may never open, and that is almost certainly correct. The people in these caves left no explanation, and none is coming. What survives is behavior without motive, held in stone and calcite by a process that never intended to keep it. The dark kept all of it, and it is still keeping most of it.